And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host and author, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome back the incredible Don Bentley, here to give us the inside scoop on his latest book, Denied Access. Don Bentley, welcome back to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Well, thank you so much for having me back again, Sarah. It's great to see you. Yes, so Denied Access, for all of you Mitch Rapp fans who always wondered how did Mitch's origin story end, Denied Access is the third book in that prequel series. And so it takes place in the early 1990s, and you get to see Mitch Rapp, Stan Hurley, Thomas Stanfield, Irene Kennedy, the whole gang mixing it up in the Cold War.
Woo! Well, I can't wait. And it's interesting that you said that, because one of the questions submitted in advance is about those very characters, Don. So I can't wait to get into everything. But first, I just want to welcome everybody, because we are broadcasting live to 8 different destinations across Facebook and YouTube. So, hey, mystery and thriller lovers, no matter where you're watching from, you are in the right place. It is the right time. It is Mystery Monday. And because Mondays can be murder, we are going to make it a little less painful and get your week off to a killer start. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. And if you're new, welcome, friends. Here's the drill. Every Monday, I give you my handpicked featured author, and you get to ask them anything. So ask Don Bentley about his writing process, his creative process, what it's like to write Mitch Rapp. I know someone already submitted that question in advance. Whatever things, yep, I see those hearts on Facebook. Thanks, friends. Whatever questions you have going on in your brain, get them going in the comments, and I will get them right over to Don. So while your little fingers are flying, I'm going to kick off with some of the questions that were submitted in advance. So this first one is from Steve. Steve says, in Denied Access, you are concluding the origin trilogy for Mitch Rapp that began with American Assassin and Killshot. How did you balance honoring the original vision of Vince Flynn while also bringing your own voice and ideas into the story? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the fun things about writing or getting to finish the origin story is you get to hang out with these characters who some of them have passed on and aren't there anymore, like Thomas Stanfield or Stan Hurley. But what you have to be able to do is figure out, how do you tell a story that is worth the reader spending 25 or 30 bucks or whatever a hardcover costs? And so doing something that is worth reading, but at the same time, you know where the rest of the series goes. And so you have to tell a story that's memorable, but also not unbalance the entire rest of the series while you do that. And so for me as a fan, first, I always wanted to know what happened between Mitch and Greta. And so in the end of Killshot, so first in American Assassin and then in Killshot, it really seems like Mitch has fallen for this girl head over heels. He's talking about she might be the love of his life. And then we never hear from her ever again for any of the rest of the books. And so to me, that was the fundamental challenge really for this entire book, is how do I tell Mitch and Greta's story in a way that honors what Vince had done before and is a story worth telling, but still makes sense from the standpoint of you don't ever see her again for the entire rest of the series.
Yeah. So bring us into the moment, because that is, I mean, my brain is panicking and freezing at that challenge, because like you said, having to tell this story that you know where it goes, but to make it believable and compelling. Did you consider several different possibilities, or did you were like, my heart knows where the story must go and this is it? Bring us into that moment.
Yeah. So spoiler alert, it's not always great to be a woman who loves Mitch Rapp, because things don't go well for you. And so if you think about kind of the two other women in Vince's original series that loved him, his high school / college girlfriend, Mary, who was killed in the Lockerbie bombing over Scotland. And then later on, his wife, Anna, who was killed in a bomb. And so, you know, when you have 2 out of the 3 that die violent deaths because of bombs, I figured Greta dying from a bomb was probably out. And so I had to, you know, all kidding aside, think about that and say, like, what is a way to do this that makes sense? And so fortunately for me, one of the fun things about reading Vince's books is how many threads he leaves just hanging out there. And so there was an interesting one, and I think it was in Killshot as well, where Mitch was weighing this relationship and how much he loved his woman, or this woman. But Greta's grandfather was a friend of Thomas Stanfield's and Stan Hurley, who had worked in the intelligence field before and was a guy of some heft from the standpoint of he knew some numbers to call to get hard men to come do things on his behalf. And so Mitch is actually thinking about that in Kill Shot and thinking, man, if it ever gets out to him, if it ticks him off, I could be spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's sending bad guys to come get me because he doesn't love the idea of me being with his daughter. And so there were a couple of little clues like that Vince kind of left on the chopping block that I scooped up and kind of pulled into Denied Access.
Ooh, that is fun. So did you have to go back and reread those, or you have them memorized?
I read them over and over and over and over again. And so I love, like, I think most people, I love holding the hardback in my hands. But when you're doing research like this, what helped me a lot is I would read them in my Kindle and just highlight things that were interesting or little ones off, or, you know, when you're a writer, and, you know, Sarah, because you're a fantastic writer too, there's times in the process where whether you're doing research or you're writing, you just get that tingle and you're like, there's something here, like there's something here I could explore. And so every time in a section of Kill Shot or American Assassin, when I would feel that tingle, I would highlight that, and then I would export all of them at the end and just go through over and over again and say, what happened here? What could I use here? And then the second part of that is the first book that Vince wrote that featured Mitch Rapp was called Transfer of Power. And so I reread that several times too, again, because that would be the next book in chronological order after Denied Access. And I had to make sure there wasn't something that he talked about in Transfer of Power or alluded to that I would mistakenly, you know, unbalance. Or this book really was because it's the first really espionage thriller I wrote. I told my wife when I was doing the edits for it, it really felt like I was coding and I was debugging a program, because there were so many little things that you would touch that then would have ripple effects throughout the rest of the book. And so that writ large was kind of like what it felt like to write in that prequel trilogy too.
Coding. I like that. I like that. Oh my gosh. John is joining us from Northeast Ohio. Hey, John, great to see you. Via Facebook. We have Sharon joining us via YouTube saying howdy. Howdy to you, Miss Sharon. Good to have you here with us as always, ma'am. We have Margaret also joining us from YouTube. She says, yay, happy to catch a murder Monday. Well, we're happy to have you, Miss Margaret. Thank you for joining us. And oh my goodness, we have hi everybody. Oh my gosh, so great to see you. Shelly is joining us from Facebook. She's saying it's Shelly from Southern Ohio. Hello.
Hey, Shelly.
Hello to you. Great to have you. Okay, let's jump into some of the questions coming in. Dawn from Margaret. She says, I mean, way to keep a guy on his toes, right? Seriously, because, oh my gosh, rereading all of this, you know, making sure that you're staying true to the story.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've all seen TV shows or books where they're like, they go back and they don't do it right. Like, I mean, I was recently rewatching a Friends episode, which is one of my favorite shows. And, you know, in one episode, Phoebe's like, I don't speak French. And then another episode, she speaks fluent French. And it's like, you can just tell that the writers either forgot or they had to go in a different direction. So, I mean, I think I'm just in awe of, you know, that you went back. Yes, exactly. Going back and looking for those loose threads that Vince had left you to pull through the story.
Yeah, it was really, so what was really interesting is Kyle did me the favor of sending me all of Vince's original books in their Word format. And so then
for
with that,
who doesn't know who Kyle is, tell us who Kyle is.
Yeah. Sorry. So Kyle Mills is the one who took over the book series after Vince tragically passed away. And so Vince's final book was called The Last Man. And then Kyle's first book in the series after that was called The Survivor. And so Kyle wrote 9 books after Vince passed away, and has just been an incredible friend and a great storyteller. And so he sent me all of Vince's original books in their Word format. And so that let me do like searches through the entire book for different characters or something like that. I will say that the Clancy estate that I got to write for before I wrote the Vince Flynn books, sometimes they would hire what they call a continuity writer, where if you were doing some strange things that might have echo effects in the series, there would be a person who would be kind of the subject matter expert, and their job was to know the series well enough and then read your book and say, oh, you forgot about this or this character or something. Unfortunately, the Flynn series doesn't have that. And so it becomes us. And so there were many times where I would text Kyle and like, hey, I've got this question for you. Does this person ever appear again or something like that? So a little more pressure on the authors in this series for sure.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. That is a lot of pressure. And the pressure to get it right, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're literally, I mean, I'm just sort of sitting with that for a moment and thinking about the honor, the
Yeah.
privilege, and also the weight of that burden on your shoulders. You are taking on someone's legacy that they poured their heart, their soul. Vince
Yeah.
created this world, this man, this character, these stories, and then you have to carry it on in a way that honors that legacy. I mean, wow, this is
Yeah.
what's that like?
Well, and so what was super interesting about that too. So like I said, I got to do kind of the same thing with the Clancy estate, but by the time I got the opportunity to write there, there had been many, many, many writers who wrote in that estate, almost as many as, or not quite as many, but kind of like when George Lucas opened up Star Wars and brought in all kinds of different writers to kind of add to the universe. With Vince, there was only ever Kyle and then me, and so that definitely put a little more weight to taking over, because you thought it's a much tighter universe. There's only ever been two other people besides me that have written in it. And then the second thing for me, so Kyle and Vince were peers. They, came up in writing together. They're about the same
Okay.
age. They succeeded. For me, I never got to meet Vince. And so he was always, first, my favorite writer as a fan. Second, when I was trying to become a writer, he was my hero. And I actually took my favorite book of his, that was Transfer of Power, or excuse me, Protect and Defend. And I note carded it all out when one of my books didn't sell, to try and see how he did that. And so I would always ask people that knew him, once I got the opportunity to write in his universe, to tell me about Vince or to tell me stories about Vince. In fact, every time I go up to New York, I try and have drinks with his agent, and I just say, tell me Vince stories. Tell me what he was like. And so what has been really fun as part of this is I've gotten to get to know some of his family. So last book tour, I got to have coffee with his dad and one of his brothers. A lot of times I'll have dinner with folks. And so it's awesome because I feel like I get to know him, but it also, again, it feels weightier again because I'm getting to know that guy who was just my hero and a legend is now a person, and I feel more responsibility to honor that legacy and to write the series, hopefully in the way that would make him proud.
Oh, that's so beautiful to honor that legacy. Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. Shelley saying, thank you, Don, for keeping Mitch going. Yes, exactly, Shelley. Thank you from all of us. John joining us from YouTube. Welcome. Tom joining us from Facebook saying, you were the perfect writer to continue Vince's legacy. Tom, I totally agree. And I have some thoughts as to why, but tell us why you think Don Bentley is the right person. Um, and oh, everyone's agreeing with exactly the perfect writer. We agree. We love that. Now, Don, fun fact about Don, he is himself a veteran. So first of all, Don, thank you so much for your service.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How did your service help to inform you, or did it, as you tell these stories of Mitch Rapp on the page?
Yeah, I think it's so my first book that I wrote that was actually published, that I sold, was Without Sanction, and it's about a former Army Ranger and an intelligence community operative named Matt Drake. And when the book came out, I was doing a radio interview, and the interviewer said, "Are you Matt Drake? Are you your protagonist?" And I said, I am absolutely not him, but I've stood in the same room with men who could be. And I think, and that is absolutely true, both at my service in the military and then in the FBI, and then even more afterwards, where before, when I still had a real job, I worked primarily for companies who sold technology to folks in the intelligence community or the special operations community. And so it was always fun for me when I'd get to go do a customer visit, we'd finish with the business stuff, and maybe I'd get invited back to the team room, or we'd go out for a beer, and I would just listen to these guys tell stories and kind of try and soak up what it meant to be somebody like Mitch Rapp. What did they think about? What did they, what were the things that grounded them? What were the things that made them human? What were a lot of what I tried to put in the books that I think Vince had in there too, was kind of the gallows humor that the people that I know, like I said, that can be him. A lot of times you tell the funniest jokes as you're getting shot at or something, because the tension is so great there that you have to be able to do something to reduce that, or what you see some in Capture or Kill is kind of that inner, which was my first Mitch Rapp book, is kind of that inner service rivalry where you have a Army Ranger who's drowning, and when he finds out it's a Navy SEAL that's going to rescue him, he said, "Just let me die, just let me die." And so those are the kind of things that the people I know who could be characters in those books really say. And so I try and pull in some of that, some of the humanity, some of the humor, some of the things that to me make them real people.
I will be laughing about just let me die for the rest of my life. Christine, welcome to the conversation, saying Mitch lives. Thank you, Don.
Hey, Chris.
This is Chris from Minnesota. Good to have you with us, Chris.
So you might recognize Chris from Minnesota's name, because when we met, I've known her a while. She's awesome. She's a Mitch Rapp super fan, and she came to my first Minneapolis signing. And so afterwards, she's like, if Scott Coleman ever needs a girlfriend, I'm your girl. And so I was trying to write, and I was like, I can't work that in, but I wrote back to her, and I'm like, you can't be Scott Coleman's girlfriend, but you can have a big part in this book if you want. So Chris Henrik, who's the wife of a case officer in Moscow Station, is actually our friend Chris here, who's on with us.
Well, great to have you, Chris. Thank you so much. And now it's even cooler to know the backstory. Thanks, Don. Robin is joining us from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She says, hi, Sarah and Don. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Robin.
So good to have you here. Y'all, I want to just pause for a moment and remind you that Don is coming on tonight for this very special author Q&A to take all of your most burning Mitch Rapp writing questions, Vince Flynn questions, all the things. And you can order his latest book, Denied Access, the third book in the Vince Flynn trilogy, from our favorite woman-owned independent bookstore. That is, of course, Murder by the Book. So whether you're watching with us in Facebook or YouTube, here is that link that you can click to get your mitts on this fabulous book. So while you are clicking and ordering, I am going to take a few more questions. So, oh my goodness, super fan perks, says Margaret Kennard. Chris says, thank you. Yay. Thank you, Don. Shelley saying, thank God we have Mitch Rapp to get the bad guys. I know I could use a real life Mitch Rapp right about now. Okay, I want to get back to some of the questions that were submitted in advance. Okay, talking about the setting and the time period choice. So this story we see shift into the early 1990s, which of course is post Cold War era, with Russian intelligence showdown and a crisis at the CIA. What drew you to that particular geopolitical moment for this book, and how did it shape Mitch's character arc? Great question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So I knew Vince sometimes played a little fast and loose with the facts in his books. And so I knew that based on American Assassin and Kill Shot, around where they were set, that it was the early 1990s. And I say a little bit fast and loose, like for instance, and this is kind of nerdy inside baseball stuff, but when the KGB was dissolved, it broke into two different organizations, and it was the FSB and then the SVR. Well, prior to that, there was a different organization called the FSK that evolved into the FSB later, I think. And so Vince actually mentioned all of those at the same time in one book. And so trying to figure out when it actually took place, I was asking Kyle, and I was like, I think it's about here. Is that what you think? And he said, yeah. And so I just made a list of like, what were all the interesting things that were happening in the world at that time. And so you had the Soviet Union had fallen. There was a coup against Gorbachev. The KGB had dissolved. And from the CIA perspective, there was really this sense of, do we even still need this organization? Because you guys missed the end of the Cold War. You missed the coup against Gorbachev. You missed the KGB dissolving. And so I thought that might be something really interesting to explore. The second thing, so another great friend of mine who's a fantastic writer, David McCluskey, was a CIA officer. His latest book is called The Persian. It's phenomenal.
Yes.
And so I knew, yeah, he is so good. He's the kind of writer that we as writers love to hate because he's so good. And so every time I see one of his books in a store, I take one of mine and put it in front of his book. And he knows it because then I take a picture of it and text that to him. But I told him, I was like, hey, David, most of the Mitch Rapp books, if not all the ones that Vince wrote, all had to do with the threat of Islamic terrorism. I really think I could do a Cold War book, but I'm looking for that thing that makes your spine tingle and say, yes, there's a story here. And he said, hey, there's a guy that you want to talk to, and he lives in Austin. His name's Milt Beard, and he was a CIA legend. And so Milt was about 80 years old. He let me come and talk to him for 3 or 4 hours. And so what was very, very interesting that was happening at this time is that almost all the Russian assets, so all of the Russians working for the CIA, had been arrested by the KGB. And we, the Americans, could not figure out why. The CIA was kind of pointing their finger at the FBI. The FBI was pointing their finger at the CIA. The actual CIA officers in Moscow Station had so many operations go off the rails that they had convinced themselves that the Russians had invented some kind of new surveillance technology that allowed them to follow CIA officers without them knowing. Now, the truth of it, what actually happened was that there was a mole in the FBI named Robert Hansen, and there was a mole in the CIA named Aldrich Ames, and both of these traitors had handed the KGB just trash bags full of documents that listed all our Russian CIA officers, or CIA assets rather. And so I thought that would be another really interesting thing to explore, is this dynamic where when you arguably need the CIA the most, the men and women over in Moscow Station are so frightened of the Russians or the Russians' technological capabilities that they won't even leave the office to go do their jobs anymore. And so all of that kind of came together and provided the backdrop for it.
Wow, thank you so much for that background. I did not know any of that, and I am fascinated to hear it. Chris is saying, I absolutely love the spy slash espionage angle. I'm going to read Milt's book. And it's so funny that you should mention David McCluskey, because I will be at the Boston Book Festival this coming Saturday, October 25th, where I will be interviewing legendary Patricia Cornwell for the mystery keynote, but then also popping up with my interrogation room, and I will be grilling none other than Mr. McCluskey. So I will be sure to put a copy of your book in front of his book in the interrogation room and film him while denied access is staring us all in the face.
That would make my day. And it I will say though that The Persian is fantastic. Like his first book was called his first book was called Damascus Station, and General Petraeus, David Petraeus, who had been the CIA director, blurbed it, and he said it's the best spy novel he's ever read. And so he probably knows a thing or two about spy novels, and David is fantastic.
Oh my gosh. Well, I am very excited because also former CIA analyst Alma Katsu, who's been on Maven's 4 or 5 times, will be there, and I will be interviewing her as well. So looking forward to that. She's
fantastic too.
Shelley would like to know, do you think, it's a tough one, do you think the Russian and Ukraine war will ever be over? Don, your thoughts?
I think at some point it will be. I think as things are now, it's not going to end anytime soon. And so I think that if it is very hard for the Ukrainians to win if they're just playing defense. It's very hard to bring Putin to the table if most of the European countries are still financing the war by buying Russian oil or Russian natural gas. And it is really hard for the Ukrainians to prosecute targets in Russia without longer range weapons like US American Tomahawks. And so I think until we as Americans decide to get serious and to kind of take the gloves off. And until the Europeans decide that they would rather pay more for their energy and stop financing Putin's war, I'm afraid it is going to drag on for a while.
Oh, that is a very sobering thought, but that sounds unfortunately correct to my uneducated ears. So thank you for the question, Shelley, and thank you for the informed insight, Don. Robin would like to say, Don, go visit Ross Gerritsen for more CIA assets and agents in her neck of the woods. Ooh, okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Robin. Oh, Tess Gerritsen.
Oh, yeah.
Tess. Oh my God, totally. Where all of those CIA agents go to retire up there in Maine.
That's right.
Shelley is voting for me to interview David with Vince's book. With Don Bentley's Vince Flynn book. And I will, Shelley, because he'll be behind, I'll be behind the camera. Only I know what's facing me.
Oh my gosh. If you do that, I need to buy you a beer when we're in Thriller Fest together. That would be amazing.
Get that beer money ready, Don Bentley. Margaret is saying an attack on one of us, ... Exactly, Margaret. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, and we need to stand united. Could not agree more. I want to share some of the amazing praise that the book has got. So let's talk about this from the Real Books by Ryan, who raves, and I'm going to pop this up so we can all see it. A callback. He says this book is a callback to what makes Rapp such a special character and a white-knuckle reminder of why the series remains the gold standard of the political thriller genre. So, Don, I want to ask you, what do you think the secret is to creating white knuckle books, white knuckle scenes that keep readers reading, so fully immersed in the story, in the pages, up late, begging just one more chapter? What have you learned? What do you know?
I think from a writer perspective, somebody smarter than me said you never want to give the reader a reason to put your book down, right? You want her in bed reading that and saying just one more chapter, just one more page. And so what you as the writer, and certainly you can't make every single page, spellbinding, but you should at the end of every chapter give the reader to just flip a reason to flip one more page, to just go a little bit further. Don't make it easy on them. When I was still an MFA instructor, that's a lot of the feedback I would give to my students is like, you're giving the reader an out right here. Don't give them the out. Just push them along to that next page and give them a reason to read one more. I think the second thing is that for me, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about it too, Sarah, like the magic in the book comes when you're doing the second or third or fourth draft, because the story's all there. And then you can start to dive in there and say, how do I put something unexpected in here? Or maybe this was the flow to the narrative until now, but man, I would never see it coming if this happened. And then sometimes your subconscious just works on that and says, hey, here's a surprise. Here's another thing. And I think the way that you keep readers engaged, besides just pushing them to the next page, is you take things in directions they're not expecting. And then they're like, oh, I got to see how that works. For you, when you're writing, do you feel like it is also like that, where it's the second, third, or fourth drafts, or do you plan out those surprises ahead of time?
Same as you, Don. I have tried to be a little more strategic about, can I ask a question in every chapter, or can I develop the question a little more? Good. Or can I provide some sort of, a momentary solve with that leads to another question? But I think you're exactly right. Although I never thought to say it exactly right like that. I think you're exactly right. I think it's about going back and saying, if I'm losing interest, having read this, the 347th time, like maybe I should, put the pedal to the metal and turn the heat up on my characters a little more. And I think that makes that's and I think you're right. That does happen in subsequent revisions. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah. And I think the second thing too, like I know our friend, Stephen James has a fantastic book that is Story Trump Structure, where he talks about ways to ask questions and ways to go back and look at what you've written and then figure out where you need to go. But I think the more that you do this, the more that you write, you start to think, I use that 3-act structure from Save the Cat all the time. And so, at the end of Act 2, there's the dark night of the soul and all is lost. And so when you've done this a bunch of times, as you're writing in Act 1 or maybe even Act 2, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, what could those 2 crazy moments be? What are those? I need 2 things that the reader's never going to see coming that is going to completely change the direction of that book. And you start to instinctively steer towards that, even if you're writing organically. And so I think Nick Petrie is another fantastic writer and is a friend of mine. And he said, your writing process changes a little with every book, and you get to be a better writer because you're instinctively making better choices because you're more experienced with every book.
So how have you changed as a writer from book 1 to Denied Access? How has your writerly evolution been?
So I used to throw a whole lot more words away, because what I realized I was doing is that I would run from my problem by writing another point of view or writing another story. And so all I was doing was, stepping back out of the thing I needed to fix and be like, oh, I'm just trying to get X number of words today. And I would get those words, but I would often throw them out. And so for probably half my books, Denied Access is my 10th book. And so maybe for the first 5, I would only write in order and say, okay, this scene happens, because I write organically and I needed to know, hey, the plot's going to build and here's the next thing. With Denied Access and maybe one of my Clancy books, I did this too. I got stuck enough in somewhere in the second act, but I knew what the climax was going to be. Like, I knew here's how it ends. And so I actually skipped ahead and wrote that. And in Denied Access, I did too. I had this great idea for how it was going to end. And so I wrote the climax and then thought, okay, what happened right before that to get him there? And then I wrote that part. And so I actually worked backwards a little bit. And I'd never would have done that before because I would have been too afraid, again, that this is just another rabbit trail and I'm going to write the end of this book and never be able to tie it to what I've written before. And I wouldn't have done that and shouldn't have done that, certainly in my first couple books. But once you start to trust yourself as a writer, to get better at the process and become a better writer, you can afford, I think, to take a little more risk. And I think the other thing is, when I was talking, Brad Taylor and Mark Graney are both kind of like my big brothers in this business. They've been incredibly kind and kind of mentored to me along the way. And I was talking to Brad, and I think he might be up at 20 something books now. And he said, when I write a scene now in one of his Pike Logan books, if it comes easy, it's because I've written that scene already in a different book. And so you're much more intentional, I think, as a writer now too, to say, how can I show this thing to the reader in a way that still seems fresh, but gives them what they come to the book to see? And that gets harder with every book you write and every book in the series. But I think that's the difference between maybe the good writers, where you get here's the continuing adventures of the A-Team that happen every Tuesday night at 7:00, and they start to feel very, very similar to the great writers where you're like a Daniel Silva book, like you're picking up his book to come back to that world. And there are going to be characters and things that you love that are a part of that world that you're going to see, but he's still going to show it to you in a way you haven't ever seen it before.
That is, wow. I will be thinking about that because I've been thinking about that as I think about interviewing Patricia Cornwell, who just put out her 29th Case Scarpetta.
That's crazy.
How are 29 books, but it still feels fresh. How do you execute that? How do you do that? Or, and it's the same, and I think that's capturing it, is how can I make this feel fresh? Wow. I love that. You guys, again, Don is coming on to give us the inside scoop about Denied Access, which is the third in his Vince Flynn Mitch Rapp trilogy. And you can order tonight or anytime from our favorite woman-owned independent bookstore. That is Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. Here is that link, and you can get your mitts on this book. Now, we are out of time. Time flies when you're having this much fun. Don, I want to thank you for coming on Mystery and Thriller Mavens. It is always such an honor and so much fun to interview you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, for spending your Mystery Monday with us. I hope your week is off to a killer start, and I hope the days and the pages will fly by. Don Bentley, you better come back when your next book is out. What are you working on now?
My next Mitch Rapp book. So,
yay!
yep.
Can you give us any little sneak peeks of what that includes?
I can tell you that Mitch Rapp is in the book, Sarah. You can take that one to the bank. That's all I got for you.
You heard it here first, y'all. Don Bentley is working on his next, which will be the 4th Mitch Rapp book. Is that right?
Well, right. It'll be my 3rd book. So Denied Access is the 3rd book in the trilogy, but it's only my 2nd Mitch Rapp book.
All right. So he is working on his next book, which will be the 3rd Mitch Rapp that he has written. Shelley saying thank you both. Christine saying yay. Robin saying thank you. Chris saying fantastic book, Don. Fantastic interview, Sarah and Don. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you to everyone who watched. Thank you to all my commenters, and thank you to all my watchers. So I see y'all as well. I see you, Natasha, Debbie, Jill M, Jill C, Sisters and Kids of the Traveling Book Club. Welcome to Book Clubs. Love having you. Alan, Steve, Sharon. Oh my goodness. Steve, Christine with a K, Christine with a C. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm not going to get to everyone. Laura. Oh my gosh. Betty. Joanne, thank you. Katie, oh my gosh, so good to have you. Okay, y'all, that is a wrap. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you next Mystery Monday. Take very good care until then.